What's up, everybody? Coach Wills here, coming at you with a brand new Valorant video. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down the meta defined, where Hiko went on stream and talked about the differences between NA, EU, and the Korean meta. So I thought it would be really interesting to break down the different pick rates and the differences between the meta of each region, and ultimately come to the conclusion about ranked meta and what you can do and what characters you can play to give yourself the best shot at climbing this season. So we're going to be breaking all that down, so smash the like and subscribe, and then go to the GameLeap website in the links down below for high quality, in-depth advanced guides, tips and tricks, VOD reviews, and much, much more. Go check it out right now. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. So first off, let's actually play the clip that Hiko talked about the meta and the differences between the regions, and then we're going to break down the actual pick rates about the Champions Masters Finals for each of the 3 regions, even though he does mention 4, but I'm just going to mainly focus on NA, EU, and Korea, but let's roll it.
NA meta right now is double duelist still. Surprisingly, to be honest. EU meta is kind of single duelist. Korean meta is more like Breach Jet, and then who really cares what they have around it? They just have like a bunch of Breach Jet strats they run, where it's very timed. You can tell it's really good. South America is a lot of double duelists as well. So
now, starting right off the bat, let's talk about the 5 most picked characters in the NA region that Hiko defines as double duelists, surprisingly. And he does say surprisingly as a member of 100 Thieves, which was a team that really was trying to make single duelist work a bit unsuccessfully. Now, that being said, the top 5 characters in NA were Omen at 100%, Sova at a 94%, Raze at a 70%, Jet at a 56%, and Cypher at a 52%. Now, as you can see, there is double duelists right there in Raze and Jet. That being said, there is also substantial play in Phoenix and Reyna, which sees various amounts of play on different teams, typically in combination with either Jet or Raze. Now, that being said, I want to compare this directly to EU, which has a much different team composition being played, a team composition that is actually exactly what 100 Thieves was trying to play, in their top 5 picks being Omen at 79, Sova at 74, Sage at 69, Raze at 54, and Cypher at 49. Now, I think the biggest difference between these regions is not just the fact that one of them is predominantly playing double duelist in NA and EU is playing single duelist, but EU is playing Sage at a staggering amount, 69% and 90% on Ascent and 100% on Icebox. When you compare that directly to NA, where Sage is actually seeing only 17% on Ascent and barely any pick rate at all at only 26% respectively to the entire cast of agents. Now, clearly, if we're talking about double duelist versus single duelist, the really big difference maker is that Sage. So there might be something that EU is doing specifically well with Sage that NA just is not matching. And if you remember, 100 Thieves did try to play exactly that composition multiple times. They actually swapped up the Cypher with a Killjoy, but essentially it's a very similar composition, but they were putting Nitro, who is notoriously someone that was playing Omen, on that Sage out of nowhere, and maybe he didn't have enough practice, or whatever set plays the Sage had to do, they weren't performed perfectly correct, and that might be why the composition didn't work. It seems to be a much more synergistic based composition, but if you want to know more, I'm going to be doing an in-depth EU breakdown so we really can get to the bottom of why this single duel strategy works in EU when it just does not work in NA. Now, before we move on to Korea, which I think is going to be extremely interesting, I want you to notice how little Jet is picked in EU at all. Only a 29% pick rate Jet is picked in EU. When you compare that to a 56% in NA, and when we get to Korea, it's freaking 70. Now that seems absolutely crazy because often Jet is talked about on like the chopping block of characters that might need to be nerfed a little bit because she's so freaking powerful. She enables op, she enables eco weapons, knives is amazing. You just watch Baby Bay or Tens pop off on Jet and you're like, oh yeah, that is freaking insane. The potential impact of that character is really high, but you don't really see EU tapping into that, and I don't really know what the reason for that is. It's not that EU is behind mechanically. EU definitely has mechanical skill capable of running a character on Jet, but that being said, maybe the NA and the Korean metas are a lot more fluid, less fundamental oriented because they have less CS backgrounds, not entirely sure about that one, but I know that Korea really focuses on set plays with Jett, so that is something that Hiko touched on, and I'm gonna get to that right now when I talk about Korea, and we're gonna compare that directly to NA and EU. So let's talk about the most top 5 picked agents for the Korean region, with Omen at 85%, Sova at 82%, Jett at 70%, Raze at 70%, and Breach at 50%, tied with Killjoy also at 50%, but slightly less pick rate, I guess. Now, before we talk about Jett and set plays and all that stuff, I want to quickly notice that in NA, in the Masters tournament, at least the final brackets, Omen had 100% pick rate, and he did not have 100% pick rate in Korea and Europe. That's mainly because there is small amounts of Brimstone being played, and that's just something to keep note of. Brimstone is still being experimented with in other regions, but NA's like, nah, no Brimstone. We don't want that motherfucker. Now, essentially what Hiko proclaims is that the Korean meta is mainly based around set plays with Jett and Breach. And to a large extent, it really proves that to be true based on these stats where Breach and Jett see a lot of play. I mean, Breach is all the way up to 50% pick rate. It's down to 44 when you talk about EU, and it's down to 17 when you talk about NA. Another really important thing that you need to take note of is look at how little Phoenix sees play. Only at 5% in the Korean region, when not only was Phoenix seeing 32% play in the NA region, but Sick on the winning team actually used Phoenix to great impact. In fact, I think he was the MVP of the entire tournament, if I'm being honest, and he was doing most of that work on actually Phoenix. Now, whether that's the appropriate meta pick in a coordinated team, or if it was just Sick flexing on people with a character that is highly flexible itself and a character that gives you a lot of individual playmaking ability, I'm not so sure. I actually might think it's the latter, but it is something to know just how big the dynamic difference is. If you looked at just the Korean meta, you would say Phoenix is trash and needs a buff, but if you look at how well he performed in NA, you'd be like, oh, the character's probably pretty balanced. So it's kind of an interesting disconnect there. Now, another really interesting that I wanted to break down is the complete flip-flop between the Cypher and the Killjoy pick rates when you're talking about EU and NA versus Korea. With NA having slightly more pick rate for Cypher at 52 versus 30% on Killjoy, and then EU having 49% on Cypher and 28 on Killjoy, so about the same ratio, very similar ratio, but Korea has it flipped with a 50% on Killjoy and only an 18 on Cypher. It's actually a bigger distance apart, but it's actually the flipped, it's opposite, which is just really, really strange. The differences we're seeing in the meta, it's clear that there is not like one overall trend with Sentinels here. I mean, you have EU playing Sage when NA and Korea aren't playing Sage, and then you have Korea favoring Killjoy when NA and EU are favoring Cypher. I mean, it's just like all over the place. It's just really, really strange and pretty interesting if I'm being honest. And that being said, let's stop talking about the differences between the regions and let's talk about what's similar. We all know that Omen is like MVP of every single region, even though Brimstone is seeing some play in Korea and EU. It's just Omen all day, every day, 85%, 80+%, and the most picked agent in every single region. So Omen is basically God status here, and the same thing applies for Sova with the second most pick rate in every single region as well. So basically, if you were picking a team composition, those two would be surefire in every single composition Hall of Fame besides Sova, which in every single region, Sova saw a 0% pick rate on split. You heard me right, 0% pick rate, every single region, when he has a gigantic pick rate across the board, and even though he had a 0% pick rate on split, he still was the second most picked agent, period. So that goes to show you that the character is ridiculously powerful on every single map, but split. So that's just something for everyone to keep in mind for you Sova mains. Sova is very, very weak. He might be one of the worst characters on split, even if he's one of the strongest characters, if not the second strongest character in the entire game. So then you might be asking, okay, so if some regions don't really use Jett, then is there any character that actually is shared between all the regions that would also be put in the Hall of Fame? And actually, yes, the last character that is similar between every single region that has an extremely high pick rate is actually Raze. Raze has a 70% pick rate in NA and Korea and still has a really high pick rate at 54% in EU. So Raze is also in that Hall of Fame for team composition. Now, that being said, Raze being so good across the regions is a little bit strange to me because of the differences in how each composition works, right? You're thinking about NA, which is a double duelist composition. Sometimes they make rush plays, sometimes they play for picks, and because we predominantly watch NA, we think of that as like a base composition at a baseline, you know, like one initiator, one sentinel, one controller, and 2 duelists. That's typically what we think, and then you compare that to EU, which is a 1 duelist composition, much slower, much more reserved, much more methodical, and then you look at the Korean region that is based around Breach and Jet, a lot of based executions and trying to make combo plays to take site control or get kills. Now, if you look at all 3 of these compositions, and then you think about Raze seems like a character that might actually be better against certain compositions and much worse against others. I could see Raze being actually better against multiple duelist compositions because you could stop them from potentially rushing, and she also is a good fold to Sage in the mirror match when you're playing EU versus EU, but outside of that, maybe she's just seeing play based on her raw power level, but I would definitely need to be doing an in-depth breakdown of more specific Raze gameplay and see the differences in her playstyle across regions, because just because the character is picked across regions doesn't mean she's played the same at all. There could be dramatically different playstyles, because I do know that NA plays a very fraggy, space creation oriented version of Raze, where it's a little bit more wild, a little bit more loose. I mean, if you look at some people like Asuna, how they play Raze, but I'm not so sure that Korea and EU plays the same. I would have to do an in-depth analysis on it, but if you want to see that, you gotta smash that like and subscribe and let me know in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to break this down more, because I think while breaking this down gave us a lot of answers, it also revealed even more questions. And if you have any of those questions, you gotta let me know in the comments down below so we can get to the bottom of this. But go to the GameLeap website in the links down below for in-depth advanced guides over every single one of these agents. Specifically, Omen, Sova, and Raze are 3 characters that are dominant in every single region. So if you want in-depth advanced VOD reviews made by our top 100 Radiant player Tanner, then you gotta go check them out in the links down below. But that's all I got for you today. Thanks so much for coming by. Please send feet pics. And I love your faces. I'll see you tomorrow.